have workers when you want them, you throw them out when you don't. It's very cheap, they don't organize, they don't ask for rights, they don't have health benefits, and the public pays for it all. Can't beat it. By 2000, there were some 2,500 prison industries in operation with an estimated $3 billion in sales. At that time, it was estimated that roughly 65,000 inmates worked in state prisons in 36 states, employed by private sector companies including Dell, Starbucks, Lexus, Boeing, Microsoft, Spalding, IBM, Compaq, Texas Instruments, AT&T, Victoria's Secret, Eddie Bauer, Chevron, and TWA. Federal Prison Industries, or FPI, which is an arm of the Bureau of Prisons, and its prisoner work program, which is called Unicor, employ approximately 21,000 federal inmates that are paid 12 cents an hour. In 2006, Unicor generated $717 million in sales. The federal government was their #1 customer, mostly the Department of Defense. Operating factories that run 24 hours a day, employing 3 shifts of prison laborers, Unicor makes Pentagon office furniture, electronics, eyewear, Kevlar vests, helmets, shorts, underwear, ammunition. They clean and repair uniforms, operate 411 call centers, provide mapping and drafting for government engineers. In 2008, Unicor sales passed $800 million on the way to $1 billion. The last point I want to make about this is about disenfranchisement. Disenfranchisement is the policy of denying a person their right to vote. It's become a major tool in electoral politics. Felony disenfranchisement is a practice by state governments of barring people who have felony convictions from voting, even after they've served their time. 48 states have felony disenfranchisement laws. 10 of them are permanent. Felony disenfranchisement disproportionately affects African Americans and Latinos as well, those 2 groups who overwhelmingly vote Democratic. The Sentencing Project found that 5.3 million U.S. citizens are ineligible to vote due to felony disenfranchisement. Half of them are African American. That balances out to a rate that is 7 times that of the regular population. The spirit of every age, wrote Eric Schlosser, is manifest in its public works, in the great construction projects that leave an enduring mark on the landscape. The Panama Canal was a physical expression of U.S. imperial yearnings. Dams, bridges, post offices, and power lines embodied the New Deal faith in government activism. Post-war America had suburbs and interstate highways. The Great Society had urban housing projects for the poor. Today, the great public works of the post-industrial era are sports stadiums and shopping malls, government security bureaucracies, and prisons. And every new prison, wrote Schlosser, quote, becomes another lasting monument, concrete and ringed with deadly razor wire, to the fear and greed and political cowardice that now pervade American society. That leads us to our last section, which is about social control. The third part of the problem, reaction, solution paradigm. I'm going to begin with a couple of quotes. The first is from Cliff Schaefer, who is the founder of the Schaefer Library for Drug Policy. He says, all of our drug laws have originally been based on racism, on prejudices against ethnic minorities and their customs or their perceived customs. In other words, all of these laws are based upon the belief that there is a class in society which can control themselves and a class in society which cannot. And Christian Parenti says, policing and prisons in the United States, along with being about public safety, is also about managing the contradictions of a class society that uses race and racism as its main ideological explanation for itself. So that's what prisons have always done. Managed the exploited and excluded populations that capitalism produces naturally through crisis and artificially through policies that make people poor. So what do I mean by social control? There's a scene in The Godfather, in the first movie. It's a scene where all of the heads of the families are sitting around a big conference table. And the topic of discussion is they're trying to find out whether or not they're going to permit the mob to go into narcotics trafficking. This is very soon after the end of World War II, or during World War II, when this takes place. And one of the advocates for going into drug trafficking stands up and he says, you know, I'm all for this, we'll make lots of money, I won't sell it near schools, I won't sell it near kids. In my city, we keep the traffic amongst the dark people, the coloreds. Those people are animals anyway, so let them lose their souls. Now, this scene, even though it is a work of fiction, is based on a real meeting that took place amongst the 5 families. It also symbolizes all of the motifs that keep popping up throughout the history of American drug policy. Power and profit, morality, racism, social control. It speaks to the presence of smoky back rooms where human life is bartered as collateral damage for business decisions. It reveals the conscious intent to immiserate and ultimately sacrifice a sector of society while profiting from their misery. And it communicates that everyone has his or her price. And if the mafia story is the story of the American family struggling to provide for itself, then the mafia's views on African Americans, by extension, becomes America's racist attitude towards its own black population. They must be contained and controlled because ultimately they are less evolved, they are animals. In many ways then, and certainly within the context of the American attitude towards drug use, the idea of, quote, keeping the traffic amongst the dark people, the coloreds, amongst the animals, becomes a powerful metaphor for the dominant social organizing principle of Western civilization during the 20th century, namely the repression of the Freudian unconscious or our own impulsive dark selves. The unconscious, as Freud determined, contained unhealthy and often dangerous desires that needed to be contained and, if necessary, medicated, sedated, or isolated. The ghetto then becomes an expression of the unconscious, and the dark-skinned denizens living within it become living embodiments of the unhealthy desires that threaten to ruin, quote, decent society. This is a banal euphemism for both the conscious mind and the dominant social order. Okay? Race, as Glenn Lowry wrote in the Boston Review, helps to explain why the United States is exceptional among the democratic industrial societies in the severity and extent of its punitive policy, and in the paucity of its social welfare institutions. Why are we so hard on punishment but not doing anything to help rehabilitate these people, is what he's essentially saying. Racism in many early anti-drug laws was pretty naked and apparent. The Anti-Opium Act of 1909, for example, served to, quote, economically depreciate Chinese immigrants who were competing for jobs. The impoverished Chinese also came from traditions of opium trafficking. They brought opium here to this country. They introduced us to opium in the West in about 1850. 25 years later, opium smoking amongst young white women in San Francisco had led to a hysteria which created the nation's very first drug law, which outlawed opium dens in San Francisco.